Alright, so like I said, guys, we're getting started. Like I said, today we're going to focus on day 2 of quadratic inequalities. So I'm going to bring a couple of things to your attention, okay? And then I'm going to let you kind of keep working on this on your own. So the first thing I want us to look at is this inequality. Negative 2x squared plus x is less than 1. Okay? Now the first thing I always do is try and get 0 onto one side. So I'm going to have negative 2x squared plus x minus 1 is less than 0. This is really the inequality that I'm concerned with. Okay? Not the one I start with, but the one compared to 0. So make sure you do that first step correctly. Okay. Now, yesterday I told you then we basically consider it an equation, right? So I'm going to go ahead and consider the equation negative 2x squared plus x minus 1 is equal to 0. All right. Let's try and solve this equation. If I take factors of negative 2 times 1, which is positive 2, and I want the factors of positive 2 to add up to positive 1, will that ever happen?
No.
No. Okay, so this doesn't factor. Once you see that your quadratic doesn't factor, what we're going to do is we're going to check the discriminant in order to make sure or to see if we have real or non-real solutions to the equation. Not to the inequality. I'm still talking about this equation. Okay? So, how do I find the discriminant?
B squared minus 4ac.
Good. B squared minus 4ac. All right, so let's see. B is, oh, sorry. Yeah, here. B is 1. So b squared minus 4 times negative 2 times negative 1. What's that going to give me? What's that give me? Negative 7. Good. Okay, what does a discriminant of negative 7 tell me about this equation? Not about the inequality, okay? Okay, the equation, okay, this quadratic equation has 2 non-real solutions. Everyone okay with that? Okay. The discriminant of negative 7 tells me that the equation has 2 non-real solutions. Okay, next thing I want to do is sketch a graph of this equation. Okay, I want to sketch a graph of this equation. Now, having 2 non-real solutions tells me what about the graph of my equation? Okay, the curve will never touch the x-axis. Everyone agree with that? Okay. Which way does this parabola open? Down. Why down? Good. A negative coefficient of x squared. So if the parabola opens down and never crosses the x-axis, would you agree that my graph has to be somewhere down here? Everyone okay with that? Yes? Cool. Okay. Now, this has all been with the equation, right? This has all been us focusing on the equation. Now we're going to go back and think about this inequality. Okay? This inequality is asking us, okay, basically what this is asking us is when are the y values of this quadratic less than 0? That's what that statement means. Okay? Because this is my quadratic equation, right? And I want to know when that's less than 0. Well, would you agree that the x-axis is the line y equals 0? Yeah, so when does the parabola fall below 0? Always. The whole parabola is under there. So no matter what x value I plug in here, my y value will end up being less than 0. Would you agree with that? So every single x value that I plug in, since this happens always, that means that every x value I plug in makes this inequality true. So what do you think my answer is? All real numbers. Good. Questions about that? So let's recap what we did. We realized that this doesn't factor as an equation, right? So then we thought about the equation and checked the discriminant. And we realized that the discriminant tells us that we have no real solutions. So we used our coefficient and that fact to sketch a graph. Then we went back to the inequality. And we said, does it want to know when our graph is above 0 or below 0? And in this case, it was below 0. And that happens always, which is all real numbers. What if this inequality sign had been flipped? What if this had been, when is the quadratic greater than 0? No solution. Yeah, no real number that I plug in here would work. Okay? Okay. So that's one of the types of problems you're going to see on the practice. Now let's look at B. A stuntman will jump off a 20-meter building in an upcoming movie. A high-speed camera is ready to film him between 15 meters and 10 meters above the ground. Using the formula, d equals 20 minus 5t, where d represents the distance above the ground and t represents the time of the jump, determine when the camera crew should film him. Okay, so I want to know basically when is the stuntman between these two heights. Yes? Okay, so I could set up a compound inequality here. What might that look like? Blake? Very good. Everyone okay with that? I want to know when is he between these two distances. All right, well, remind me how I solved this. Okay, let's subtract 20 first. So minus 10 is less than negative 5t squared. It is less than negative 5. Okay, divide by negative 5, which is going to cause what to happen? My sign split. So I'm going to divide by negative 5. I'm going to get positive 2. It's greater than or equal to t squared, which is greater than or equal to 1. Sorry, just greater than, yep. All right, I'm going to rearrange these so they go from least to greatest. I'm going to rewrite this as 1 is less than t squared is less than 2. And then what would we do? Square root. So the square root of 1 is 1. That has to be less than t, which has to be less than the square root of 2, which since this would be a calculator problem, it would be okay to give me a decimal for that. Okay, but basically, what does this mean?
You start filming after 1 second or...
Okay, so they should film when? They should film between 1 and root 2 seconds.
That's a very short amount of time.
It is.
Basically,
That's why it's a high-speed camera.
Why? They can just film the whole time and then cut it out. That's just a waste of film.
It's a waste of my time.
Questions on that one? All right, flip to the back, and we're going to look at number 7. Well, first, let me tell you about 5 and 6. 5 and 6 are big numbers, but they will factor, okay? You set your equation greater than or less than 0, and then they will factor. You have your calculator to help you with the big numbers. Now, with 7, however, 7 is not one that's going to factor. So let me give you some hints on how our calculator can help us on 7. All right, so we're taking a trip to Fiji, or actually the manager of a travel company, plans a trip to Fiji, and he wants to make profit using this equation. Okay? Now, he wants to make $10,000 in profit. So that means that I want this value, this negative 40x squared plus 1920x minus 3200 to be greater than 10,000. Or equal to, I guess you could say. Do y'all agree with that? He wants his profit to be more than 10,000. Or equal. Okay, go ahead and get this set to 0. So minus 40x squared plus 1920x minus 13,200. It's greater than or equal to 0. Okay, which way does this parabola open?
Down.
Down. So what what are we concerned with?
Everything that's above.
Everything that's above what?
Y equals 0.
Y equals 0. Good. So if this is my y equals 0 line, okay, we're concerned with everything above this line. Would you agree? What are these 2 points called? Those are zeros or roots. So you're going to use your calculator to do second calc 0 to find these 2 values. Now, are we interested with where the vertex is in this particular problem? No, because it doesn't say what's the maximum profit. It says how many people would be needed for my profit to be above 0. Okay? So don't waste your time when you set your window messing with the Y max. You don't really care. All you really care about seeing are your zeros. Okay? And when you calculate your zeros, you're going to get these 2 values, and it's going to help you narrow down to a solution. Everyone okay with that? Okay. The rest of the time is yours to work on this homework. It is, of course, due on Monday, and I will be coming around to help you. So go ahead and try this one now until the bell. And then you can work on the rest when you get back.
So we didn't learn anything new.